All right, today we're going to be digging into carburetors on the 2004 Yamaha Vstar 1100. Obviously, we've got two carbs here. We won't be going through taking the same things off of both of them twice, but I'll show you how to do at least one, and then if there's a difference, I'll show you how. A couple things here to start. We've got your obviously your throttle cables are off. We've got it off the motorcycle already, but you've got your one cable going in here, so you got your push and your pull, and this would be your pull right here, would be going down here, wraps around, goes into that. This would be your push here, and that kind of just pulls it back after returning. So here's your idle adjust here, and that can be done just with your fingers here, and what that is doing is just is essentially just moving these throttle cables in a tighter position if you're wanting to turn the idle up. Turn it clockwise if you're turning the idle up, and what that's doing is opening these butterflies, one on this side, one on the other side, just opening those butterflies up, allowing more air and pulling more fuel through. So that's those there. We've got a couple sensors on here that to clean a carburetor you won't have to remove. This is kind of a butterfly position sensor here on this side. We've got your choke that comes in on top here, and this choke cable comes in and hooks up to here, and what that does is pull plunger out on this side and then a plunger out directly below the cable on this side. So if you've got your cable pulled, if you've got your choke in the on position, both of your plungers will be out from their position, and you just pull like that. And it should be spring loaded to where when you let off when you shouldn't have a ton of tension, to where eventually that choke will kind of fall back into place. If you forget it on, it should slide back into place. So we've got your intake here. It's where your line hooks up to from your intake, and what this has got a vent system on it, or a screen system on it. When you're pulling fuel or pulling air from your air box, it goes into here and hooks up to this line here. What that does, and you can see when it's pushing air through, it opens these slides here, and then again on the other side. So if your bike is running, it's going to be pushing air into this port here that I showed you with that screen on it, and that's going to be opening your slide here. You can watch. So when you're going down the road or when you're sitting there idling, it'll just slowly open. If you're going down the road wide open, it'll look like that, allowing more air through. But also your throttle is doing the same thing, so they work together. So if you're wide open going down the road, obviously your butterfly is going to be completely open. This is obviously going to be sucking air in or pulling air in, pushing your slide open as well. So now we're going to dig into that carburetor, and we're going to just pull one side off. Essentially they're identical. This side here is going to have an extra Phillips screw on the bottom, and that's to hook a hose clamp up to, like that, to keep these lines out of, or these wires out of this assembly here. So we're going to pull these two sensors off, and they're just butt connectors, one flat, one's round, so you won't get those confused. And then we've had to loosen up this sensor here to move this slightly to get this bowl off. So I did that beforehand so I'd have that ready to show you. So you just simply loosen this with a 10mm wrench and move it slightly so that you can get that bowl off. Next we've got 4 Phillips screws, and then again on this carburetor 4 Phillips screws. So those will have to come out, and they don't have to be extremely tight. You're going into aluminum, so again, just keep that in mind when you're going back together. We've got your air fuel screw down here, and I'll show you that before we pull this bowl off. And the way you set that is in the position that you got it from the factory or from the previous owner. If it was running good at one time and just isn't anymore, and you're going to go ahead and clean this carburetor, what you do is you set your flat screwdriver in there, and then you count your turns in. So we've got a half a turn, 1 full turn in, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. So we've got 3 full turns in. Now we can go ahead and unscrew that screw completely out of there. And then just going back together, remember that we're 3 turns out. So you want to screw it all the way back in and then turn it out 3. And that's the proper setting for your bike. Now, if you're in a different altitude or if you've got different performance things to your bike, you'll want to change that, and you'll want to look at the specs with that exhaust and intake and other performance parts. So we've got your bowl off now, and those screws will just kind of dump out there. We've got your O-ring here. You want to inspect that, make sure it's good, make sure it's not completely flush. You want to make sure it sticks out a little bit from that bowl so it'll seal up nicely around here. If it's ripped, any kind of debris sitting in there, you want to replace that, and the carb kit will come with that bottom bowl gasket. We've got your pilot jet down here, your main jet here, and your secondary, this is your main jet here, and this is your secondary main here. So to pull your pilot jet, again, flat screwdriver, and not a very big one. Make sure you're on there tight before you're starting to remove it. And this one is tight here. So I'm gonna grab a little bit bigger screwdriver. These don't have to be extremely tight, just because they're brass going into aluminum. You wanna make sure they're snug so they don't fall out, but you don't need them to be extremely tight. So that's your pilot jet there. And take compressed air, blow through it. You wanna make sure when you hold it up to light that you can see completely through it. So we can take that one set to the side. Now we've got the same thing over here where we've got your secondary main. And this one you can use a little bit bigger screwdriver on it. If you use too small of a screwdriver, you'll kind of slip in between and booger up those that whole area. So again, make sure you can blow through this one and this one, and then make sure you can see through it. Also, what I like to do is take Carb choke cleaner. I prefer the Gum Out brand, and spray through there, and then you can use compressed air too to clean it out. Now you want to make sure on your secondary main jet that we've got a spacer here. You want to make sure that spacer goes back underneath of that secondary main, going back together. Now we've got your main jet here, and this is the largest port jet on this carburetor, is your main jet. And sometimes when you loosen this up, even with a flat screwdriver, your main jet holder will come out, and that's fine. That's a way bigger port on this. So if your main jet is cleaned out, this jet is going to be, or that main jet holder is going to be cleaned out as well. So blow through it again, make sure you can see through it, hold it up to light, and those jets are cleaned out. Now, another common problem is you've got fuel coming in this port here, and then it's going to drop down and come out here. So if you're constantly having fuel drip from your motorcycle when you're riding, when you're going down the road, that's a pretty common thing to have that. And what that is fuel sloshing around in here. Well, this one doesn't have it on there, but it's an overflow. And this is when you're draining your fuel, it'll come out here and come out that nipple there. So loosen this Phillips and come out there. Fuel will come out there. You'll make sure that you've got a line under here so it's not draining directly down onto your motorcycle engine. You'll ruin paint. Could potentially start a fire if you do that. So we're gonna go ahead and pull this bowl off now. And what we did here was loosen up this Phillips screw. You don't have to take it completely out, but you can. So once you get it loosened up, at least this will kind of give us enough room to slide this pin out of here and just lift straight up. This needle and seat is what we call this. Well, this is the float here, and this is the needle and seat here. You want to make sure that there's no grooving on this needle here. Make sure there's no grooving in this seat here. Make sure if a piece of sand or a piece of rubber or something, a piece of rust from your tanks come in through your where your fuel comes in here. A lot of times it'll sit in between your needle and your seat here, causing fuel just to continue to dump in. So you can replace your seat if need be, if it's out of round or if it's worn really bad. Also, you can adjust your needle here slightly, and this is a metal tab here, or aluminum tab, that you just slightly bend down. If you've got fuel constantly dripping from your motorcycle, you can bend that down slightly. But if you've got a needle and seat issue, don't just continue to bend this tab down. Replace your needle and seat. They're not expensive, and you want to make sure you're not going to damage the how much fuel is coming in to your motorcycle just because you're trying to stop a leak. So we've got your inlet here for your fuel. You blow through there, and you can see that fuel being pushed out of there. So make sure that port is cleaned out, and then we'll go ahead and put this back together, and I'll show you a couple more things. Doesn't matter which way this clip goes on this float here. Just take your pen, oops, we dropped it down in there. Then our air fuel screw came out as well when we loosened that. So let's see, we'll go ahead and put this needle and seat back on there, or in this float here. And then we need to grab that pin. Set this down in here carefully so that we're not binding that needle and seat, or that needle specifically. Grab our pin, and we're going to push it in here. Again, it'll go underneath that Phillips screw. So as long as that Phillips screw is up enough out of the way, then we can tighten that down. Again, it doesn't have to be tight, just make sure it's snug. We don't need to go and torque it down a whole bunch, but make sure that pin is straight across there when you do that. Got your pilot jet here. This one sits all as far down, the farthest one down. Take a small flat screwdriver, snug this one up. Now if you get these mixed up, remember this one's got the spacer on it, the secondary main, but also it's got a smaller port than your main jet. So if for some reason you don't have that spacer in there, just keep in mind that that's going to be a smaller hole, and you can generally tell when you hold them up side by side, up to light, you can generally tell that one is smaller than the other. Look in your book to see what your specs are for your altitude, your temperatures, and the performance done to your bike. Snug these back up, and we'll go ahead and put our bowl on here. So slide right down in there. Again, make sure this is out of the way so that that's not causing any issues. Again, making sure that that bowl gasket is good, that O-ring, so that we don't have fuel leaking out of there when the bike's sitting. Don't forget to hook up your electrical lines, and then clamping this back down. We'll put our air fuel screw on, then we'll flip this carburetor over and look at the slide there, the needle, and the diaphragm. So we've got a spring here, and then your air fuel screw here. And a lot of times, if we were to shake this pretty good, there'll be a washer sitting down in there, and that sits on that side of the spring. So we'll put the washer in if it falls out, the spring, and then the screw. And again, we take that screw down there until it's seated, and then pull it out 3 turns. Half, 1 1/2, 2 1/2, 3. And that's all set. Make sure that this sensor's tightened down, and then we can flip this carburetor over. Next, we're going to pull the slide off, and that's going to be a little bit more of a challenge for me to hold this so you can see it, but we only have 2 Phillips screws on the top cap here. And so we remove these. I like to keep my hand on there because it is spring loaded, and you take that cap off, spring stuff isn't going to just go flying everywhere, but I'll show you why here in a second, why I keep my hands on there. This is a rubber diaphragm underneath here, and you want that to seal, and too many times that diaphragm will get pinched in there the wrong way or get caught somewhere. That's why I keep my finger on there, to keep it from coming up when it shouldn't and binding and ripping. So you want to make sure that you can push this up, you can pull it completely out and inspect it to make sure there's no leaks. You don't want this folded over on top of here. You want that to go in this this groove here, and you want that to sit perfectly. Now this diaphragm can only go in one direction. You can see that slide there won't allow you to put it in the other way. Make sure that this O-ring is on top there, going back together. You can, on this model, adjust your needle height. What you do there, grab vice grip pliers, pull out this, and it's kind of held in there with the O-ring, so make sure the O-ring's in there. make sure that spring stays in there. And it kind of hooks in there, but if you pull it out uneven, it could come out of there. So now we've got your needle, and we'll take that out carefully because there's several different washers on here. And one of the washers stayed down in there. Two of the washers stayed down in there. And what it is you've got a washer on one side, then a plastic spacer, and then you've got the clip that holds everything in, and then a spacer up top. Now, on this model, you can adjust your clip. So right here, we've got the third ring up from the bottom, and we've got a washer on top. And then again, that washer on the bottom. Now, you can adjust those depending on your riding condition and performance done to the motorcycle. Going back together though, make sure you get them all put back in the order they came apart. And if they do come off, take it out and redo it. Better doing it now than when you've got the carburetor back on the motorcycle. You can hold it with a screwdriver if you need, or a pair of pliers if you need to. Set it down in there, but you want to make sure it sits all the way down. Needle goes all the way down, then take your cap here. And I like to always use pliers putting it back together so that spring doesn't come out of place. And then go until it snaps into place again. Now going back together, making sure you have that O-ring on there. Slide this back down, but then also sometimes you got to take your finger, kind of run it down with that needle so that it goes down into your main jet holder in the bottom. So if you can see here, you want to make sure that this needle goes down into the center of that. A lot of times if you take and push it too hard up, it'll push that needle out, and then when you get back together, you'll realize something's not right. So going back together, you want to make sure that is sealed completely. If you've got carbon choke cleaner in there, or fuel, or brake cleaner, which you don't want to use on these, you can set your diaphragm out in the sun, let it heat up a little bit. Obviously don't use heat like a torch or something, but you want to make sure that it's shrunk down to where it needs to be, then going back together. I like to take my finger then and kind of hold up on that diaphragm while I get everything in place here. Make sure that right there sits over top of that O-ring. So as soon as I get that on, I continue to have my finger underneath there, holding that slide from going too far down. If it goes too far in, it will pull that diaphragm out of place, and then you'll have problems. You want to try to get that on there as straight as possible. And then once you've got pressure on there with your fingers, you can take and put these screws in. Put the two screws in there. And torque them down. All right, that is the carburetor on a 2004 Vstar 1100. If you have questions, ask me. If you enjoyed this video or learned something, please like, please subscribe. And we'll get more videos. We'll do valve clearance on this motorcycle. We'll disassemble, rebuild this motor, and do top end, adjust valves. So make sure you like this video. Make sure you continue watching. Thanks a lot.